A couple weeks ago, I asked you for your questions that you wanted me to answer. Today's the day. Let's get into them. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Ian. I'm known as WanderBeard around these parts. And in today's video, I'm going to answer your questions that you submitted to me that you wanted to know more information about. So let's go sit down, finish my coffee, and go through your questions. All right, so basically the plan of this, as you know, is that about a week or so, 10 days ago, I submitted a community post and basically said, hey, if you have any questions, feel free to submit them to me and I will answer them in an upcoming video. Well, this is that upcoming video and I'm really excited to go through these questions. I've got about 15 to 18 questions or so I'll try and get through all of them. So thank you first of all for your questions. I really appreciate it. I think that there's some really good questions here today, some really interesting ones, and hopefully that you'll get a chance to kind of listen to them and get some, hopefully some answers you're looking for, I guess. Thank you so much, as always, for watching, of course. I appreciate this. I couldn't be doing this without the support of everyone who watches my videos. Past 39,000 subscribers within the last 24 hours, which again is incredible. Every one of these milestones that I hit just gets more and more exciting for me. So I really do appreciate everyone who has subscribed and watches my videos and again submitted all the questions for this video today. So I think what I will do is I'm just going to kind of pick these at random. I actually printed them off, so I have them all here on paper as well. This is also a reminder, of course, if you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so. Just hit that subscribe button down below. I really appreciate it. If you turn on the notifications, that way you'll make sure you always get updates on future videos. YouTube has kind of changed things around a little bit, where if you ignore a couple of notifications in a row, you actually stop getting notifications on newer videos. There's nothing I can do about that, obviously, or anybody else. But if you're a subscriber and you're getting the notifications and you're checking out the videos, then that's awesome, and I really appreciate it. So the very first question comes from Devin Walker, and his question was, what is your favorite destination so far? So I'm going to answer this with two different places, and I know that's cheating a little bit. The most favorite place I've been to on the last 2 years worth of travel, so this includes the United States, Canada, Mexico, Central America, that whole stretch. I would say that my favorite place so far has probably been Ometepe Island in Nicaragua. Now, it's difficult to just pick one because every country that I have visited, I have found somewhere very special that I was like, I could probably stay here. And so what ends up happening, of course, is that you sort of fall in love with these places and then think, oh, this is the best place ever. And you sort of ignore any local issues that might exist or, just the day-to-day life. But for me, I spent 2 separate trips on Ometepe Island. I was there first back in middle of 2025 for about a week. And then I returned the beginning of 2026 for another week. I actually retraced my steps in a couple of cases because the places that I went to that I really enjoyed, I wanted to go back and see again. So my first trip to Ometepe, same as everybody else, you land in Moyogalpa on the ferry from the mainland. And from there, Moyogalpa is kind of like this launch point. You can hang out there if you want, and that's great. There's lots of activities to do there. What most people will do, however, is they will use that for a night or two, use it as a base of operations, rent a scooter or a vehicle of some sort to get around the rest of the island. And so that's what I did in both occasions. I stayed Casa Caimana, which was a lovely little family-owned hotel in Moyogalpa, which was just wonderful. Very affordable, great people that run the place. Rooms were very comfortable. They had a great little breakfast in the mornings if you wanted to add that on. And it just was a great introduction in both cases to the island, to the kind of laid-back attitude that's there. Just a really cool experience to be there. And so after Moyogalpa, I packed up and I headed down to the other half of the island and went down to Balaguer and Merida for the rest of my time there. Had a wonderful time, did a hike up through the hills to go see some of the old rock carvings, that type of thing. And then on my second trip through, instead of going back to Balaguer, I actually went up to Alta Gracia, which is up on the sort of far right corner on the top island, where I hadn't gone the first time. So I could have been able to complete, at least 4 corners of the island. When I finished up both times, I went back to Merida as well on my second time and stayed at Rosa's Lake Cabins there, and that place was incredible. Just a beautiful view. You had really nice sunsets there on the beach. The cabins were awesome. The family that runs it is awesome and so sweet. And again, they had breakfast options and things there. And it's just a cool vibe. I think I certainly didn't tap into everything that Omotepe has to offer. Lots of people go hike the volcanoes, for example. I just wanted to kind of go and relax and enjoy the vibe that was there for the most part. I met some really cool people when I was there on both occasions. There's lots of great restaurants. It's in Nicaragua, but it doesn't feel like Nicaragua, if that makes sense. It's like its own little community. And anyway, that's why I enjoyed Omotepe the most, I think. But again, I could pick off a place or two in each country that I totally loved. Monteverde in Costa Rica, Copan in Honduras, Santa Ana in El Salvador, Oaxaca, and Holbox, and some other places in Mexico. Just everywhere I went, I had somewhere that I liked. But if someone asked me, well, what's your ultimate number one of all your number ones, I would have to say that Omotepe is it. My other favorite destination so far is actually going back over 20 years. And I loved Japan. In 2003, 2004, I spent a year in Japan teaching English. And it was sort of an early career break, I guess, from IT. I'd only been doing IT for 4 years at that point. And I wanted to go and teach English for a year, so I went and did that. And Japan is beautiful. It's a really, again, everywhere has issues and different problems and things you have to be aware of. But generally speaking, Japan was amazing. I loved the history that's there, the culture, the blend of urban and traditional that still remains there today. Getting around is so simple with the train system that they have, the buses, all that sort of stuff. And it has all the conveniences that you could want from anywhere else. So I think a lot about going back to Japan for another visit, which I'm hoping to do. When I was in Japan, I also traveled and visited South Korea and Thailand, and those were both incredible spots. I had Thailand was 10 days of just kind of wandering the country, and I wanted about 100 more days after that. So that's the other place, I guess, if I'm looking at 2 different places that I love the most. One would be obviously Omotepe from my recent travels, and then Japan from my previous travels. Similar to that, someone asked me, Marty6767 asked, what was the place in which you felt more welcomed? And I think one of the things you realize when you travel, and one of the things I always encourage to others, is to realize that when you travel and when you meet other people in other places, people are generally very welcoming and very friendly and very willing to help you. And I didn't really ever have a bad experience where I didn't feel welcomed, or was told to get out of here, or you can't be here, or whatever, other than random museums occasionally. But generally speaking, people everywhere are very friendly, very welcoming. They're very happy to have you there, to have you explore their city or their town or their village. And I think that that's something that I hold close to me, is that wherever I go somewhere, I always assume that, I'm the new guy in town. I don't really know much about where I am or what there is to do necessarily. And as Anthony Bourdain once said, you have to always remember that you are the stupidest person in the room, and to, let other people kind of guide you. And it's a great way to kind of open yourself up to meeting people and having more enriched experiences when you travel. Gargandale, out of all the places you traveled to, which one did you like the least? So this is sort of the opposite. my my easy answer for this is Cancun, Mexico. I had a really negative experience there overall. I really tried to give it a fair shake, to be honest. So Cancun is a place where you go if you want to go on a beach and go onto an all-inclusive resort and just disappear for a week. I am not a lay on the beach resort kind of person whatsoever. So for me, it was a really interesting place in that I wanted to stay sort of in the main part of town, away from the tourist zone or the tourist beaches area. And it made it really difficult. It's 45 minutes to go from town out to that area, which is where I wanted to go to see some of the ruins and a museum that was out there. It was 45 minutes each way on a bus. The main part of town was pretty rough in spots. The place I stayed at wasn't very good, so that didn't help at all. They had sort of described the place as one thing, and then when I got there, it was something very different. So overall, just a really negative experience. Now, I fully admit that I probably had some little bit of bias towards it before I even got there. I had just spent a week in Holbox, on Holbox Island in Mexico, which was one of my favorite places in Mexico. Had a beautiful time there. It was such a cool vibe there. And then to go from that to Cancun was just kind of like from a high to a low sort of thing. So that kind of played into that a little bit as well. But just in general, it's just not a place that I enjoy. Even Cancun Airport is not a great airport at all. It's a very depressing experience in that it's difficult to get to. You can't just take a bus out there. There's no way to get into the airport from the highway unless you walk, and it's too dangerous to walk because the main road that's there, people are going by at 60, 70 kilometers per hour, and there's no sidewalks. So it's just a very blah experience. There's not really any waiting areas to sit down. Like, you're forced to kind of sit down like a restaurant or on the floor. There's no baggage, like storage. There's, it's just not a great experience. And I've talked to many other people who have felt the same way about the Cancun airport and have had, very difficult experiences. When my family was down visiting, my brother and his wife and my 3 nephews, and they were at the airport and they had, a bunch of hours to kill. And so I had suggested to them maybe, there was a shopping mall just a couple of kilometers down the road from the airport, maybe, hop in a taxi or something, but they couldn't because there was nowhere to store their bags at the airport. They didn't want to drag, 5 or 6 suitcases of luggage with them to the mall. So there's nowhere to store your bags at the airport anymore. There used to be, and they took it away. And then when they talked to the taxi guys, they wanted like $200 or $300 US for about a 5-kilometer ride down the road, there and back. And that just goes to show you that the taxi drivers there are trying to take advantage of people at every opportunity. And so it's just a bad experience all around. So it's one thing that I find really frustrating, because for a lot of people who go to Mexico and fly into Cancun or fly out of Cancun, it's not a great introduction to the place. And so I hope that something gets fixed with that. From G Fluent. Hi Ian, I wanted to ask you how you made peace with yourself and started putting your new life back together. And about your journey, are you working remotely while traveling, or is this just a full-on vacation? So how I made peace with myself was a realization that what I was doing wasn't for me anymore. I worked, as I've said, I worked in IT for 25 years, basically. Various jobs, various places, all over US, Canada. I taught English in Japan for a year in that 25 years. But for me, it just became, I wanted something different. I wasn't feeling very good at the time. I wasn't very healthy. I wasn't mentally very healthy. I felt like it was just something that if I kept doing what I was doing, that I wouldn't be doing it for much longer. So I made a conscious choice to make some changes. And in my case, it ended up arguably being fairly drastic. I quit that job. I sold all my things that I had that I didn't really want anymore. That was, fill out an apartment. And I hit the road, and I wanted to go and see some places that I hadn't been to, that I've always wanted to see, and it worked out great. I had a wonderful experience. And so I think the experience alone really kind of helped me make peace with my decision. I was very happy, and I continue to be very happy with the choice that I made. And it's been a great experience so far. And even just sitting here in my front yard of my parents' house, talking to you on a camera, this is a lot of fun. So I really enjoy it, and that's, I guess, how I sort of gotten past where I was and into this sort of new chapter or whatever, if you will, and it's been great. So as far as working remotely while traveling, or is it just a full-on vacation, I think it's neither of those things. Like, I'm not working for anybody else remotely, but running a YouTube channel by yourself is definitely a full-time job and a half. I'm putting in a lot of hours every week to make videos, to work on my website, to improve different aspects of all of that stuff. And so that in and of itself is basically a full-time gig, and it's one I enjoy, though. And I'm continue to work at it and can continue to improve at what I'm doing, and just try and every day get a little bit better at what I'm doing, because this is all new to me. So, since I started this, I mean, I wasn't a big YouTuber, or I wasn't even very good in front of a camera. Arguably still not very good in front of a camera. But yeah, this is, for me, this is a full-time job. And, the revenue that I get, for a little bit of revenue that I get, and the little bit of revenue that I get from YouTube certainly helps, combining that with the savings that I put together and everything else. It's been great, and I hope to continue it for as long as I can, for sure. DJ46104. Do you ever plan to return to Canada long-term or work in your previous career? Are there any places where you could see yourself living longer term? So as far as Canada goes, I mean, I love Canada. I know a lot of people say that they need to get out of it because, it's this or that or whatever, but I love here. This is where my family is. This is where I grew up, and I'm a proud Canadian. I wear that badge literally on my backpack, but I wear that badge quite strongly, and I use it as an opportunity to show people that we're good people, and we like to just kind of explore the world and respect others and all that sort of stuff. So as far as long-term goals, I don't know yet. Probably at some point down the road, but I can't say for sure. Right now I want to keep going, keep seeing more places. I've been home now for a little bit with my family and just getting some work done here, and this is a few other little things that are going on, which I will talk about in a future video. But for now, I want to keep checking out some other things, and I'm really looking forward to that. As far as my previous career, I have zero interest in returning to IT. I would do it if I had to, like if I was in a place where I desperately needed some money or, whatever. But as a career option, no. And it's interesting how fast things have changed in just the 2.5 or so years since I left, with this sudden explosion in AI and, language models and all this kind of stuff, and all the pressure that's happening to people now, and all of the changes that have happened in the industry just in the last couple of years. It's been a lot, and so I just don't have any interest in returning to that at this point. Are there any places you can see yourself living longer term? Absolutely. Mexico is great. I could definitely see myself living in Mexico long term. There's some really cool places there that I really, really enjoyed. Some of them are big cities, like Mexico City is awesome. Oaxaca is amazing. I really liked Guadalajara when I was there. Guanajuato was really great when I was there. So some of those parts of the country are fantastic, and I could definitely see myself easily spending some time there. Again, looking at some of the places I love so much in my travels, like Omotepe would be a place you could go when you just want to kind of get away from everything. It's a pretty special place, and pretty laid back, but pretty rustic at the same time. So you kind of have to prepare for that. And I think one of the failures that a lot of people have when they travel and relocate somewhere is that they bring their expectations from home with them. And they think that, well, I can live the same life there that I do here. I can, expect the same things. You can't, and you have to leave that where you are. If you're going to go live somewhere else, you have to try and live as best you can to how the locals live, and accept that there are different problems and that there are different issues you'll have to contend with. And but overall, I think that there's definitely some places that I've been to overseas so far where I could definitely go to. So Carl Lake 1 asked me, do you think the American life, go to school, get a fake degree, get married, spawn, divorce, get a fake master's degree, work hard, get married again, blend families, and grow old and broke is foolish? Yes or no, and why? So that's kind of a loaded question, because for some people, they envision a life of, getting married and having kids and having a big house and growing old, and that's awesome. If that's what you want, then that's fantastic. And no one can tell you differently. No one can say to you that's a stupid thing to do because it's just, society is crumbling and all this sort of stuff. Well, ultimately, it's your own choice. And no one can tell you what's right or wrong. Only you know what's best for you. You can listen to the advice of others, but at the end of the day, the choice is still yours. And second to that, it's also important to accept that if you are doing something and you're not enjoying it, try something different. People feel like they get into a situation or a relationship or a lifestyle or whatever, and that they're stuck in that forever. And that doesn't have to be the case. I think that people often should look at what they're doing and always be mindful that if things aren't working for you and things aren't going the way you want them to, try something else. It's not that big of a deal, and people are not going to look down upon you. People who care about you, who love you, who respect you, are not going to look down upon you and say, that was a dumb idea. Everyone has their own reasons for doing things. Everyone feels that, maybe something isn't working. Mix it up. And it doesn't mean you have to go and totally flip the script and change your whole life. You can change some small things and see if that helps. Maybe it's just stress, or maybe it's just anxiety about something related to work or whatever. And sometimes those small changes can make all the difference. Find a new hobby. Go for a walk somewhere you haven't been before. Go read a book that you haven't read, that you've always been meaning to read. Or try a new recipe, or whatever it is. I think all of those things can really make a difference for people. And so asking about this specific scenario, which was very specific, I think that, again, for certain people, that's great. Everyone's path is unique, and I don't think any of those are right or wrong. They're just as individual as your fingerprints. Everyone's different. So I don't think it's foolish, no. If I said it was foolish, then I would be saying my parents are foolish and my brother is foolish, and, because they've had very happy lives together. My parents have been married well over 50 years at this point, and, it's worked out great for them. So it just wasn't for me, I guess is the best way to put it, and there's nothing wrong with that. So Nabil Ahmed 9892 actually asked 3 questions, and I'll answer the 2 short ones first because they're short and the answers are short, and then I'll answer the third one, which is a little bit similar to the last question. So he asked, do you miss the 90s? Yes, I do. The 90s were awesome. If you lived through the 90s, as someone who can remember them, the 90s were a lot of fun, especially the later 90s. I was just finishing up university at the time and starting to explore and learn things, and I was still in my 20s at the time, and it's great. It was just, there was definitely lots of issues in the 90s as well, but it felt like we were moving in the right direction as a society, and it was pretty awesome. It's a pretty exciting time. And so, yeah, I definitely miss aspects of the 90s quite a bit. His other question was, do you play video games? Not as much as I used to. I used to be a big Fortnite player, actually, for a number of years. And my buddy Othello, who's probably watching this video, he and I played Fortnite almost every night for several years, especially during the pandemic. I actually ended up becoming a Fortnite creator of sorts, creating like maps for other people to enjoy. I had a couple of fairly successful ones, one in particular around the Squid Game TV show, and that was basically good enough to pay off my car loan when I had one. So that was kind of how I was involved in games. But I've played games my whole life. You know, I have a long backlog of games that I try and pick away at every once in a while. I just got the new Lego Batman game, which I'm excited to try. And yeah, so yeah, I wish I had more time for them right now, to be honest. But yeah, I do like a good video game. And then his third question, a little bit different. What is your opinion of this modern world full of hate, overpopulation, deforestation, and hard to find peace? And so I think that if you come at the world with that attitude, it's going to feel like it's completely overwhelming. I think that what you have to do is kind of silo some of those thoughts a little bit and look at it from the perspective of how do these things affect me on a day-to-day basis. That's not saying that you can't be mindful of larger issues and be wanting to try and make those bigger issues go away or, you know, whatever. But if you're coming from the perspective of the world is full of hate, as you said, and overpopulation and deforestation and all these, it's a lot to unpack, and that's a lot of unnecessary weight on your shoulders to carry around with you every day. Now, I'm guilty of that too. I have many times taken on reading the news and reading this and reading that and thinking, oh, you know, everything is just falling apart. But sometimes I also have to recenter myself a little bit and go, well, I'm only a small part of this. I can only do so much. So my part in this is to try and just be a good person and to help educate others and show them that, whoops, almost lost my papers. Show them that, yeah, you know, that day to day, most of that stuff is not going to affect you, you know. Overpopulation and deforestation isn't going to ruin your day. It's long-term prognosis for a lot of this stuff isn't great. And I have a lot of opinions on that stuff that I'll keep off of this channel. Just, you know, it's not really topics that I feel comfortable talking about here. But I do think that there are lots of issues that have to be addressed. But I think that, yeah, I think day to day, just try and make peace with making sure your day and your focus on yourself for that day is as good as it can be. And that's a big first step, I think, in all of that. So I hope that kind of answers that question. So Simon Walking asked me, when do you come to Europe/Germany? Have you ever been there? And it's funny, this is the now second time recently that Germany has come up in a discussion. When I was in Nicaragua on Ometepe Island for the second time, I actually met a woman by the name of Anya, who is from Germany, who was visiting Nicaragua for the first time. Hey there, hope you're doing well. Hope the spring has continued to be really nice for you. And yeah, we chatted a bit. We chatted over lunch, and then we chatted again on the ferry ride out. And she was like, well, I hope you come to Germany someday. And so I said, well, yeah, hopefully I will, because I would love to see Germany and Europe as a whole. I've had a list of, 24 countries in Europe now for quite a while that I wanted to see. And really for me, it just comes down, at this point in my travels, it comes down to cost of those types of things. Europe is very expensive to travel. And I have to keep that in mind. Like I just spent 2 years traveling through Mexico and Central America, and I would have spent that probably in about 3 months in Europe. So for me, it's just a budgeting thing right now more than anything else. There are large parts of Europe that I am very much looking forward to seeing one day. Germany especially is near the top of that list, or at the top of that list. So hopefully one day I'll get to go to Europe and spend a nice amount of time there and check out a bunch of different countries and eat lots of bratwurst and good beer in Germany and just kind of explore the rest of the countries there as well. So Naveen Smartencar 4180 asked me, what is your own first reaction about yourself when you decide for going outside of the country, for collecting different experiences through different places? Second, what is your parents' reaction when you decide to remain a bachelor for your life? How did you convince your parents about this decision? So this feels more like you're looking for advice on how to do this yourself a little bit, and that's great. So my first reaction was, well, I've always loved to travel, so it wasn't a huge adjustment for me to want to go and do more of it. I had said earlier that I had been to Japan and Korea and Thailand. I've also been to the Dominican Republic. I've been to Cuba before. And so, I've always kind of had a little bit of interest in travel. And so for me, it was an easy thing to do. It wasn't like I was trying to do something totally new and original. It was more of a continuation of the dreams that I had about traveling in the past. So it wasn't a huge shock to myself that was what I ended up doing. I think that if you haven't traveled before, it can be a huge adjustment. And that's why I recommend, like, if you're going to start traveling or you want to start traveling on the regular, my first recommendation is to start small. Travel within your province or state first, then within your own country, and then go from there. There's lots of places people say, oh, I want to go see this other part of the world. And it's like, well, have you seen the other town that's down the street and see what they have to offer? There's places here where I am here in Cape Breton in Canada that I have never been to, and I've lived here for over half my life. So I think that if you want to go and do travel and see some other places, make sure you've seen the local places first as much as you can, and then expand from there. And to the second part of your question, what was my parents' reaction when I decided to remain a bachelor for your life, and how did I convince your parents about this decision? So I was married before. About 20 years ago, I was married for a couple of years. Just didn't work out in the end, and we went our separate ways. And that was really, it was a lesson for me. I learned a lot from that. And so I just decided that I didn't want to do that again. And that was really it. I've certainly dated since then, plenty of, met lots of people. I've dated a number of times, sometimes for longer periods than others. But I didn't ever have to convince my parents of the decision. My parents have always supported me in everything that I've done. And I've been very lucky in that way. And that, they understand that this philosophy of sorts that I have about, everyone's path is different and everyone's trip, through this life is unique and special to their own. They can understand that too, and so I think that they understand that it was just a different route for me. Me and my brother are very different. He's married, he's very successful with a nice job and wife and 3 boys who are all awesome. And for me, it was just the opposite direction in the end, and that's okay too. I think pressuring everyone to do the same thing and conform, if you will, if that's the word you want to use, to make everyone feel like they have to hit all of these certain benchmarks or steps in life, that's just going to lead to a lot of problems. And we see that. 50% of marriages end up in divorce now? There's a reason for that, and I think that the opinion that everyone needs to do all of those things is an old opinion that needs to go away, and that people just need to accept that paths are different, lives are different, people are unique, and so are their ways through life in general. Partibus 645. Hello, I hope you're doing well. I am, thank you, and I hope you're doing good too. You see, I'm stuck in this dichotomy of how to do life. On one hand, the hustle-hard culture, which I really approve of, convinces me that I should go all out, full throttle, that I don't leave any stones unturned, and grind hard, and in the process become the best version of myself. On the other, I kind of feel like life's all about a slow Sunday morning, spending time with your loved ones, going out having fun. You know, putting the feet up and chilling just because one life right, you got to be so happy. I'm just confused. I'm just trying to figure it out. Your 2 cents on it would be more than welcome. Thank you and have a great day. So I guess my initial thought is, why do those two things have to be mutually exclusive? Or why can't you do both? If you want to work hard and, grind, as you called it, and, work to become the best version of yourself, that's great, But you should also make sure you have the time when you want to kick your feet up and relax and enjoy time with your family. You can do both, and you can do both quite successfully. But the trick is to separate that work and life so you find some kind of a balance. There is no worse thing you can do for yourself than put yourself into a position where you are just working all the time. It might be great for a while, for a few years, for whatever. You might really enjoy that hustle, but what ends up happening is you forget about all the other things that can also be important. Lots of people, work hard and hustle hard and all that stuff and end up not getting that success that they're looking for. And in the meantime, they've also lost that family time, that downtime, that personal time that they also now wish that they had. So I think, there's certainly a balance there. And it's like a lot of arguments I see online these days. Everything is black or white, right? Like it's either on or off, or 100% or zero. There's nothing in between. Well, life isn't like that. Life is full of gray area, and life is full of things that are 90% good or 10% good or 50-50. And so I think you just have to find that balance and do both. And that's really the only way that you're going to get through this, if you want to do both. You can't just say I need to work 80 hours a week and then still regret not having time for family. Like, you've got to dial that back a little bit. Work as hard as you can for 40 hours a week or 50 hours a week if you want, but just make sure that you have that time set aside for yourself and to do the other things that you really like to do. Because I can speak from experience. Time goes by very quickly, and one day I love working hard and hustling and doing all this great work and making all this kind of money, and then the next thing you know, you blink and it's 20 years later and you're burned out and feeling like you're at an end. So just don't let it get to that, and just make sure you find that balance early on. And I think that balance actually, they will help each other. The hustle work will allow you to enjoy the downtime more, and the downtime will allow you to re-energize to work harder when you're working. Ted's Vlogs asked me, how do you build friendships? Are you part of any faith community? Thanks for your great videos. Well, first of all, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate that. I'm glad you enjoy the videos. How do I build friendships? Well, I have a lot of long friendships that I've had for many years now, that I still maintain. So, there's that old adage of when you're traveling alone, you're not lonely. That's very true in my case. I talk to, as I've said in other videos, I talk to my parents every day when I'm on the road. Usually have a video call every evening just to check in, make sure everything is good. Talk to my friends back here in Canada every day. And then you just meet people along the way. And, you have those conversations and you have those moments where you really connect with people who are doing the same thing you are. They're just traveling and, enjoying where they are and what they're doing. And it's a nice cross sort of, you get this cross connection a little bit where some of those end up becoming permanent friendships, and you end up talking to them all the time online, or you maybe bump into them again down the road somewhere else or whatever, And so I think that for me, it really is just about those moments and those people that you meet along the way, and adding to the friendships that I've had for a long time. I think people sometimes get a little too hung up, like if a relationship or a friendship fizzles out, that's okay too. Like everything else, friendships have lifespans, and people go in different directions. Life happens, whatever the case may be, and that's all right. So that's just kind of how I do it. I just look at it as people I meet along the way, the moments that I have with them, and if it continues on after that, that's great. And if not, well, that's okay too. Am I part of any faith community? I am not. I would consider myself agnostic, basically at this point. I guess I used to joke and say I'm a well-read agnostic. I've read all the different religious texts from the different religions around the world, both when I was in university and since. So I understand where those faiths come from and what they're based on. It's just not something that I partake in. And that's fine. I don't judge anybody else for if they want to have a religion in their life or faith in their life. That's totally cool. Everyone needs something. For me, I just choose to focus on myself and try and just be a good person in general. I'm very much a facts-based person. I want facts, I want data, I want this and that, and so that's kind of where I'm at. So hope that makes sense. 7Ray 8H, I think it's like Riyadh. Do you want to go to Saudi Arabia someday or not, and why if you'd like to? I don't have many places on my list that I wouldn't go to. I think that there is value in going to as many places as you can. So yeah, I would love to visit Saudi Arabia someday. It's a really interesting place, I think, culturally, historically. I think that there's a lot of value in learning more about Saudi Arabia. I think that it's grossly misunderstood in a lot of places from the outside, and so I'd like to visit the inside and see what it's really like, and try and get an understanding of some of it. As I said earlier, I'm very much a facts and data-based person, so I like to see those things for myself and kind of understand it at the ground level. So Saudi Arabia is a place that I would definitely like to visit one day, check out, and I'm sure it would be a wonderful experience as a visitor. To be really interesting to see, and a really cool spot, I think, despite the heat. So Shoe 6 asked me, what do you think of an 18-year-old from Iraq who aims to study in Germany through a vocational training program? I think you just pronounce it Ausbildung. My German's terrible. Because he doesn't accept Arab society and traditions and loves the Western way of life. There's nothing wrong with that at all. That's a very specific goal, a very specific path that maybe that specific 18-year-old from Iraq wants to do, and that's great. I think that to have that sort of vision that early in your life is fantastic. Most people don't know what they want to do when they're 25, 35 years old, 52 years old. So if that's what you want to do, then do it. Figure out the steps that are needed to get to that point and execute on it. So if you have that kind of plan in mind and it's that detailed, run with it. See if it's something you want to do. Figure out how these vocational training programs work, what the requirements are for them. Make a list. Do I have any of these things already? Do I want to do some of these things first? Are some of these steps easier than others? And just knock them off one in a row. And then when you get to the point where you have all the qualifications done or all the checklist completed, then the next step is to actually execute on that and go to Germany and study from there. That's fantastic. That's a really good goal to have. And it's one that's, I think, easily achievable if you stick to a plan, because it's something that would definitely have a checklist that you could run through for sure. I believe I have one question left. I'm just going to double check my notes here to make sure and finish off my coffee while I'm at it, which is now ice cold, but that's fine. Yeah, one question left, and it's a good one, from Kitch001. Simple question: do you have any regrets? So I think that regret is an interesting question, because it can mean many different things to many different people. People get so tied up in what they're doing at the moment that they get all stressed out and think that their bigger picture can never happen. And so in some cases, people are regretting things before it's even had a chance to happen. Having spent now, 5 decades here trying to figure out my own life, do I have any regrets? Not particularly. Do I have things that I've done that I've learned from, positive or negative? Absolutely. I think that if I was to pick one regret, or something that you would consider a regret, is that I didn't start doing this sooner. I went to Peru in 1998, and I spent 4 to 5 months there working with Care International. I had an amazing time in Peru as a 24-year-old, 25-year-old, 25 actually, just before I left. And it really opened my eyes onto what was out there. It was a big step for me. I had never been outside the US or Canada at that point. So to go from that to, South America and not really learning the language very well, and going there with the expectation that I was going to help the local offices with their technology, was a huge change. And I embraced it and I loved it, and I still think about my time there every day. I had met someone when I was there, that I had an incredible time with, and I think that it was a really life-changing moment. It's one of those times where I looked at something and went, wow, this is what I want to do. And then I came back to Canada and I finished my university program, and then I went off to Boston and I worked at a .com company for a couple of years, and then I floated around after that through various jobs and different things, and the travel side of things kind of went away a little bit. I started working, longer term in some places, bigger jobs. I worked for BlackBerry for 6+ years. My most recent job, I worked there for 9.5 years. And it became very much a situation where I was head down, sort of, in the work all the time. And I guess that would be the one thing where I am like, I wish I hadn't done that so much. I wish I had found a better balance. And that's why I have mentioned it a couple times today about finding this balance between working and life and just things in general. Because what ends up happening is that you realize one day that you didn't want to necessarily be doing this all along. And now you've also missed out on all the other time when you could have been doing something else. And I'm not telling people to go and quit your job or blow up your life or whatever. Regret is a big word, and it's one that I use very carefully, because I am more of the perspective of, instead of calling them regrets, I call them, learning opportunities, I guess. I discovered what is important to me. I discovered what I'm all about, and I use those as things to go do something different. I think that really is the whole encapsulation of all of this, is that I wish that I had gone and traveled more 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when I had the opportunity to. I was making pretty good money at the time. I had, very little in terms of responsibilities at the time, and I just was working. I was just focused on the work, and so it's led me to now being 52, 51 last year, leaving when I was 50, and trying to make up for some of that lost time. And that's not something that necessarily can happen. You're never going to go back and say, oh, I can make up all that lost time and I can go do all these. No, that time is gone forever. You're never going to get that back. So the best thing that you can do is pivot or make the adjustments and move forward from there with a new perspective on things and enjoy it as best you can. And I see a lot of comments from people saying, oh, well, you're being irresponsible or you're selfish or, this or that. I argue the opposite. I think that making a conscious choice to do something different for yourself is the healthiest thing one person can do. Others may not agree with it. It may not align with what they have for expectations. But at the end of the day, you're living your own life, not theirs. You don't have to impress anybody or convince anybody else that what you're doing for you is correct. Just do it, as the old Nike commercial used to say. Life is too short for you to feel like you have to do all these things to impress other people. Your family will understand. If you want to do something that is so out there from what they have for expectations, they will ultimately understand. It may take some time. I was very lucky in that my parents have been very supportive since day one. I'm very open with them. I talk to them a lot, and they respect me and they respect my choices. For others, it may not be that simple. You may feel like getting rid of one potential regret leads to a different one. You may say, oh, well, I can't do that because I wouldn't talk to my parents for a while. And that sort of becomes a regret that hasn't happened yet. So I think that just be mindful and always remember that your life is your own and that you don't have a whole lot of time in the end of the day to make those decisions and to do those things, because life comes at you fast, as Ferris Bueller once said. And, you do have to kind of stop and realize when those times and when those moments come up that you make the right choice for you and not for other people. I think that's all the questions that I've received. I've now been talking for well over an hour. We'll see how this ends up when I clean it up a little bit. But it's been a good set of questions, and I hope that the people who asked these questions today, thank you again for submitting them. I really appreciate it. I hope that the answers were what you were hoping for or looking for. And if you have any follow-ups or if you're looking for more information, just drop them down in the comments on this video, and I'll do my best to get back to you. I couldn't, as I said earlier, I can't do this without you people watching. So that's the whole reason that I'm doing this is, not only for myself to explore and to see these places, but also for you to enjoy the videos and enjoy this kind of interaction as well. So if you're still here after an hour, thank you very much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you found the answers to the questions interesting or helpful at least. And it means a lot to me that people reached out with some really great questions for this today. If you'd like to support me further, there are a few different ways you can do that. I obviously have a Patreon, which you can see here on the screen. And I also have a couple of donation links down below if you're interested in that. You're certainly under no obligation to do so. But if you want to, those are there as an option. Please leave a like or a comment on this video. Let me know your thoughts. If you have, like I said, follow-up questions or other things, feel free to put them down below and I will do my best to get back to you. And remember, life is short. Wander. And I'll see you in the next video.